Yeah.
This interview that you just did with this woman, Cathy Newman, was that in the UK?
It was Channel 4, UK.
I just went. I felt bad, but I was also laughing. I went to her Twitter page to read, with each one of her tweets, no matter what she says, someone writes underneath it, so what you're saying is, and then some ridiculous. But by the way, your fans were mocking her, but politely, non-aggressively. I didn't read any rude things. Like there was no insults, or there was, well, maybe a few insults, but there's no swears. It was just playful mocking of the interview that she did with you, because the interview was ridiculous. It was a ridiculous interview. I mean, I listened to it or watched it several times. I was like, this is so strange. It's like her determination to turn it into a conflict. It's one of the issues that I have with television shows.
Yeah.
Because they have a very limited amount of time, and they're trying to make things as salacious as possible. They want to have these sound bites, these clickbait sound bites. And she just went into it incredibly confrontational, not trying to find your actual perspective, but trying to force you to defend a non-realistic perspective.
Yes, well, I was the hypothetical villain of her imagination, essentially.
Yeah.
Well, what happened, what was interesting, too, the way it played itself out, because I met her in the green room beforehand. You know, she was being made up, and then they put a little bit of powder on me, and we had a friendly kind of interchange, and then we went and sat in front of the cameras and for a couple of minutes, you know, before the show got rolling, and we had a pretty pleasant back and forth, and then as soon as the cameras went on, she was a completely different person. Oh. And I thought, oh, I see. I see what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so that kind of alerted me to, well, the fact that there was something rotten in the state of Denmark, let's say. Yeah, but, you know, this is also why YouTube is going to kill TV. Because television, by its nature, all of these narrow broadcast technologies, they rely on forcing the story, right? Because it has to happen now. It has to happen often in 5 minutes, because they only broadcast 5 minutes of that interview. They did put the whole thing up on YouTube.
To their credit.
It hasn't ceased to amaze me yet. I think that they thought that the interview went fine. That's the scuttlebutt I've got from sort of behind the scenes, because I know some people who know what's going on at Channel 4, and they're shell-shocked by the response. You know, and then of course there was the counter response. The Guardian the next day published an article saying that, you know, the head of Channel 4 had to call in police security because of threats. You know, well, first of all, you can call the police in about anything, and they never did detail out exactly what the threats were. You know, but then about 20 newspapers picked that up and went for well, Cathy Newman is now being harassed by an army of online trolls for doing nothing but doing her job, which, well, and then there was a backlash against that in the press. And so it's been what do you say about that?
Someone took an audit of the actual interchanges that between fans and her, and there was way more negative ones coming your way.
Yes, that were seriously negative. Yeah, that's right.
Seriously negative, violent, harassing, just rude. There were way more.
Yeah.
And no one picked up on that at all. It was all, the narrative was she's a victim, even though she was highly aggressive in this. But
she's a funny victim. It's not like she's not successful.
Yeah.
You know, it's like at some point you think you should have to hand in your victim card. I think like when you go to an Ivy League university, it's like right then and there. You get to hand in. Yeah, because you don't get to be oppressor and oppressed at the same time. That's just too much.
Well, one of the things that you pointed out was when you were talking about competition for very lucrative jobs, and you were saying, look what you've done. Like you must have had to work here. And she proudly was saying how hard she had to work to get there. I'm like, well, yes, of course. No one's going to hand this to you.
No, definitely not.
And this is why you were saying you are opposed to equality of outcome.
Equality of outcome. I can't imagine anything we could possibly strive for in our society that would make it into hell faster than equality of outcome. Like the historical evidence for the pathology of that route is so strong. It's like you have to be historically ignorant beyond belief, or malevolent or resentful beyond comprehension in order to think that that's a good idea, to argue for that.
I agree with you, but I think that even if you came into this with no knowledge of history, but a complete understanding of human beings, you would say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And one of the best quotes that I've ever read about it is that if you have real, true freedom, you're never going to have equality of outcome. Because with real, true freedom, you have the freedom to not engage. Well, look, if you look at a guy like Jeff Bezos, for instance, that Amazon guy who's worth more money than anybody ever, right? That guy works all day.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a maniac.
Oh,
he's
yeah.
acquiring all these different companies, and everything he's doing is designed to succeed.
Yeah.
I mean, he's just
Well, that's what
fanatical
Gates just
about it.
said,
Yes.
too, in a recent interview. And I know some guys that are, they're in approximately the same universe as those two, and they just work all the time.
That's all they do.
All the time.
Yeah.
And they don't just work. They work so efficiently and so effectively and make use of every second in ways you can't even imagine unless you're in that sort of position. So, and doing that doesn't mean that you will succeed, but not doing it certainly means that you will fail.
Well, not doing it certainly means you will never achieve that level of success, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about equality of outcome.
Yeah.
I don't want that. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to work like that. I don't want to do what he's doing, and I should have the freedom to not do that.
Yeah.
As he should have the freedom to do that. If we're going to play this game called capitalism, which we're all agreeing is probably, at least in as far as the models that we have right now, is the best one that we have. If we're all going to play this game, if someone decides to be the Michael Jordan of capitalism, you can't stop them.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say, no, you're playing this game too well. You're playing this game too hard. You're too obsessed with this game. You're going to have that.
Yeah, you can stop them. You can try to stop people from winning crookedly,
Yes.
which is what you should do. And,
Yes.
there's a couple of things that are really worth delving into with regards to that, too, because there's this sort of Marxist notion that all this inequality is generated as a consequence of capitalism. And that's actually technically false. Because if you look at, there seems to be something like a law of nature that's described by this statistical model called the Pareto distribution. And it basically suggests that in any creative domain, there's going to be a small number of people will do almost all of the output. But it doesn't just apply to human beings. It applies to the heights of trees in the Amazon rainforest. It applies to the size of cities, and it applies to the mass of stars, and it's something like the more you have, the more you get. It's something like, you can imagine how that would work with a star. As it gets bigger and bigger and its gravitational mass increases, it's going to attract more and more matter. And then as a city grows, well, more and more people are excited to move there because of all the opportunities. And so some cities start to grow tremendously and others don't. But this phenomena where a small number of people end up controlling a tremendous proportion of the resource is not only limited to money, and it doesn't only occur in capitalist societies. It occurs everywhere. It's like a natural law. So you see the same thing with number of points scored by a spectacular sports figure. There's always a tiny proportion of people who are way ahead on the curve, or people who make records, or people who sell paintings, or people who compose music, or people who sell music online. It's all the same. It's the 1% gets 80%. And so, well, first, we can't blame that on capitalism. And second, we should note that it actually does constitute a problem, which is what the left-wingers are always jumping up and down about, right? Like, too much inequality starts to destabilize your society. And it isn't obvious how to shovel money from the top end, maybe the 1/10 of 1% who have almost all the money, down to the people who have almost nothing in a way that's effective, so that they don't get thrown out of the game completely and so that the whole society doesn't destabilize. We don't exactly know how to do that. It is a problem because inequality does exist and it does tend to magnify across time. And then there's another problem too, which we haven't figured out, is imagine that in order to make everyone rich, you have to tolerate a certain amount of inequality. That seems obvious. We don't know how many units of inequality you need to tolerate per unit of wealth generated. But the answer is definitely not zero. It's definitely not zero.